point in time, WCW had the most enviable talent roster in the world. Backed by Ted Turner and Time Warner, Senior Vice President Eric Bischoff was able to attract not just major stars who made their names in WWE, such as Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash, but also hot young up-and-comers who would go on to revolutionize the business, like Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, and Chris Jericho. And let's face it, pretty much everybody in between. Just about anyone with two legs in spandex worked for WCW either slightly before or during the Monday Night War era, it seems, but not everyone who had plied their trade in WWE rings saw fit to shake hands with Bischoff, and there are some notable cases of WCW wanting, yet failing to sign WWE talents. They run the gamut from established main eventers to mid-carders, announcers, backstage personnel, and even those who were yet to even enter the business. Each is an interesting case that, had they actually happened, would have made wrestling history very, very different. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE stars WCW failed to sign. Join us. Number 10, Bob Holly. Look at the WWE roster during the Monday Night Wars and you will be hard-pressed to find a more loyal soldier than Bob Holly. Signing with WWE full-time in 1994 and lasting an incredible 15 years before being released, Holly was around for the good times and bad. He would have to endure his share of false starts and dodgy characters like Thurman Sparky Plugg and the New Midnight Express, but finally found his niche as the grumpy guardian of the hardcore division. It was during the height of his success that WCW came calling to ask whether or not he would fancy jumping ship, right as he was in the middle of contract negotiations with WWE. Head of Talent Relations Jim Ross, on his guard after letting Jeff Jarrett's deal quietly expire, was the one trying to tie Bob down. WCW apparently offered to double whatever WWE were willing to pay him without hearing the dollar amount first, but Holly was a WWE guy and appreciated the opportunity that Vince McMahon had given him, not to mention the race car he had gifted him years earlier. It was the right decision for Holly as he continued to be a fixture on WWE television, while WCW went into a sharp decline, ultimately never to recover. Number 9, Tatanka. It's actually a little bit odd that Tatanka didn't show up in WCW at any point, since he was an over character with a recognizable gimmick, and after leaving WWE, didn't really do much of anything in the business outside of independent shows. The Native American warrior had enjoyed life in WWE, being the recipient of a lengthy winning streak and push on television, which coincided with high-profile feuds against some top stars. However, after a few years on the road and trying to keep up with WWE's intense schedule, he was getting tired and ended up leaving the company in the spring of 1996. Before he officially departed, however, he was contacted by Eric Bischoff and WCW, who were then really beginning to gather some momentum and looking to snap up recognizable names for Nitro. According to Tatanka, Bischoff offered him a lucrative deal and planned to have him shown on camera in the audience during a broadcast and have an altercation with another talent. But the former $1 million corporation man put an end to the conversation, noting that while his contract was due to expire, it hadn't yet and thus he wouldn't commit. Once his deal ran out, he chose to ignore WCW's advances and pick his own schedule instead. Number 8, Jerry Lawler. One of the great what-ifs is what would have happened if Jerry Lawler had signed with Eric Bischoff's WCW, something that didn't almost happen during the peak of the Monday Night Wars, but right as they were about to end. A few months before WCW was sold to WWE, Eric Bischoff was desperately trying to engineer a deal for himself and a team of investors to buy the company from AOL Time Warner. They were confident that a deal was about to go down, and word made its way around the industry that the Bish was about to reboot, putting several free agents on high alert. One man who found himself without a paycheck was Jerry Lawler, who had recently left WWE in protest of them firing his wife, Stacey the Cat Carter. The King called Bischoff at 5:30 a.m. one day while Eric was driving somewhere, probably the Gold Club, to let him know that he was available and if there was any interest. The former WCW vice president was indeed interested, thrilled with the prospect of bringing puppies to Atlanta, and endeavored to follow up. Nothing ever came of it though, as Bischoff's WCW deal fell apart, WWE swooped in, and Jerry ended up back with his former employer by the end of the year. Number 7, Owen Hart. Before getting his break teaming with and later battling against against Big Brother Brett in WWE, Owen Hart had explored his options and wrestled for WCW, briefly working for them in 1991 before deciding to sign with Titan Sports. WCW had wanted to sign him back then, but couldn't get the deal over the line as Owen opted to go where the Hitman was, feeling that his siblings' main event status would help give him extra security. When things soured between WWE and Brett years later, manifesting in the Montreal Screwjob at the '97 Survivor Series, Owen suddenly took a different view of the situation he was in. He requested to leave the company in order to follow the excellence of execution, as well as the British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart down south. WWE wouldn't allow it, however, holding him to his contract and telling him that despite what went down, he would be welcomed back and wouldn't be punished in retaliation. Other accounts suggest that Owen simply felt the need to support his brother and that he never really wanted to leave in the first place, but at this point, it's all a little he said, she said. It would have been amazing watching Owen work with the Jerichos and Guerreros of the world at the time, but sadly, it was not to be. Number 6, The Rock. One of WWE's great weapons in turning around the Monday Night Wars was not just the star power of Steve Austin, but an up-and-coming crop of main event players, including The Rock. The Rock had always had the look and athletic tools to be a top guy, but it took him a little while to put it all together and have his charisma shine through. Rocky Maivia was deemed tedious to a changing audience that wanted to see shades of grey and big boobies, while the Nation of Domination allowed him to develop his act and gain the confidence necessary to take himself to the next level. WWE always had big hopes and high expectations for the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, and it never once looked like he would defect to the competition. But that doesn't mean WCW didn't try, of course, though it supposedly happened long before he laid the smackdown on the glass ceiling. When a fan asked him on Twitter in 2013 if WCW had ever made an approach for his services, the Great One revealed that they had done so in the beginning of the Monday Night Wars and offered him twice as much as his WWE salary. Well, I mean, if it's good enough for Bob Holly, you know? He turned them down, saying that he wanted to move the crowd first and that the money would come later. I hear he can lend you a $5 these days if you need it. Number 5, The Godfather. Charles Wright got into wrestling almost by accident when he was spotted by some wrestlers while working at a bar. They encouraged him to get into the business, telling him that his size and look would make him a marketable commodity. And it certainly worked out, but Wright was never a true fan of the business and was more than happy to duck in and out of it whenever he wasn't enjoying what he was doing. In it to have fun and make money, Wright listened when WCW approached him about coming in as the New World Order's head of security, and he tentatively agreed to do it, only to later find out that that position had been filled by Virgil for a third of the price it was going to cost WCW to bring in the former Papa Shango. Wright was annoyed at Virgil for costing them both money, but ultimately relieved that the move never materialized. After speaking with fellow Nation of Domination man Ron Simmons, who had worked at WCW a few years earlier, it became apparent that the Godfather would encounter issues with some of the good old boys backstage. His loyalty to WWE paid off as he hit the jackpot with his fun-loving pimp persona and was inducted into their Hall of Fame in 2016. Number 4, Pat Patterson. He may not have been a star in the ring anymore, but few people were as important to WWE's success in the late 90s as Pat Patterson. A genius when it came to talking with talent and laying out their matches, the first ever Intercontinental Champion's speciality was the unique finishes he would habitually come up with. Pat's had a knack for finding the right match ending, especially when it came to major television or pay-per-view bouts. Conversely, WCW's finishes were routinely atrocious, often ruining not just matches but whole shows. They could have the better wrestling, superior production, and bigger crowds, but in the end, the climax would let them down. In order to remedy this, Eric Bischoff had designs on bringing Patterson on board, though he soon realized the bond between Pat and Vince McMahon was unbreakable and that he would have to look elsewhere. So Bischoff instead turned to Johnny Ace Laurinaitis, who had a similar reputation for concocting dramatic endings. Interestingly, Bischoff also tried to poach Patterson's fellow stooge Gerald Briscoe, who considered an attractive offer but also stuck with Titan. Both were rewarded for their devotion. Number 3, The Undertaker. The Undertaker and WWE are synonymous with one another. Perhaps Vince McMahon's greatest ever creation, The Undertaker gave Mark Calloway an incredible 30-year career, during which he became arguably the industry's most respected legend. Taker was extremely loyal to WWE, going above and beyond countless times for the company, working with everyone regardless of their skill level, while traveling the road and wrecking his body. Vince appreciated that and counted on the dead man to act as a locker room leader and standard bearer for the rest of the boys in the back. Despite their relationship being so close, Calloway did at least consider going back to WCW. He'd had an unremarkable spell there before signing with WWE, of course. This was when WCW were handily winning the Monday Night Wars, and WWE was struggling both creatively and financially. Taker had a word with Kevin Nash, who assured the Phenom that he'd be able to get him a sizable guaranteed contract if he were to make the jump. Obviously, he ended up passing and sticking with WWE, still tasting a little bitterness after the way he was dismissed by WCW the first time, while being thankful to McMahon for providing him the platform to become a star. It was an astute move because it wasn't too long after that WWE began to turn the tide with the Attitude Era in full flow. Number 2, Brock Lesnar. It's well known that Jerry Briscoe was the one who recruited Brock Lesnar, while the next big thing was making waves in college as an amateur wrestler. With his size, look and athleticism, it's no wonder that Jim Ross signed him to a contract, which at the time was the largest deal ever offered to a developmental prospect. In another universe, Lesnar could have ended up putting pen to paper with WCW, as Vern Gagne had tried to push the then president Eric Bischoff into signing him. This was before he was a WWE man and was still on the market, with New Japan also expressing an interest in signing the goddamn freak of nature. Bischoff essentially blew Gagne off, saying that he was so mentally frazzled by the chaos behind the scenes at the time that he didn't give two thoughts about some rookie from Minnesota. Man, talk about dodging a bullet for Brock, eh? Just thinking about Lesnar being booked by Vince Russo in Deathbed WCW is the stuff of nightmares. He'd have probably ended up being the third best one in the Natural Born Thrillers, or fighting Vampiro in a graveyard or something. WCW similarly chased away another member of OVW's golden generation by telling Batista that he would never make it in the business, as he attended a tryout at the power plant training facility. Reports of WCW's executives lighting their cigars with $100 bills remain unconfirmed. Number 1, Shawn Michaels. Along with The Rock, Shawn Michaels is possibly the only other Attitude Era main event star that never stepped foot in a WCW ring at any point. In the mid-90s, the Heartbreak Kid had no desire to leave WWE, as he was one of the top paid stars, the recipient of a big push, and was working with his best mates like Clique members Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Come mid-1997, however, things were very different, as Hall and Nash had defected, Michaels had lost his smile, and the increasing tension between him and Bret Hart was making the dressing room a volatile place to be. After Shawn and Bret had a fight following Shawn's infamous Sunny Days promo, Michaels stormed out of the arena, threatening that he would never work for WWE again, and was on his way to WCW. He no-showed events, disconnected his house phone, and even did a magazine photo shoot wearing a WCW Outsiders t-shirt in a bid to goad Vince McMahon into canning him, but the CEO would not do it. There were no formal negotiations between HBK and Eric Bischoff, and the volatile showstopper could have just been using going there as a threat to gain leverage, but he ended up staying in WWE anyway. Once Michaels' in-ring days were over, Vince even paid him $750 a year to basically not go to WCW. So that's your video, Wrestle fans, and remember, if you enjoyed this and would prefer me to stay at Cultaholic and not go to work for a rival YouTube channel, $750,000 should be about enough.